And Moshe said, Hear, O Yisrael, Yahweh your Elohim, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom to everyone worshiping with us at home. The name of the message today is called The War Against Boys and the Rest of the Family. And I'd like to start the message off today on an upbeat note, but what we're going to talk about today is actually a very grave situation in our society. And what I'm going to talk about today has the potential to make some people quite mad. Well, why would they get mad, Stan? Because this sermon will not be politically correct, for one thing. Yep. And another thing is I'm going to talk about Jezebel. And I know from firsthand experience that when you talk about Jezebel, she gets angry. And I'm going to talk about Ahab too. Because it is the spirit of Ahab that gives Jezebel the permission to work. And when this is pointed out, it usually makes both Ahab and Jezebel mad. Now, I'm not going to talk so much today about their lives. I'm going to talk more about how their spirits are at work today. Our nation, and more specifically the people of Yahweh, are under attack. And for the most part, we're allowing it to happen. Hasatan is attacking us with the spirit of Jezebel and Ahab. And you know what? We've gotten so desensitized to it that we'll stick our heads in the sand and act like nothing's going on. Some of us are likely so oblivious to the fact that we're under attack that we think that things are going on just like they ought to be. Well, in what way are we under attack? Well, for starters, there is a war being waged against our boys. You may have remembered from other messages that I've given the answer to this question. What was the sin of Adam? Does anybody remember? First of all, he did not keep the Torah given to him by Yahweh. Next was the fact that he did not exercise leadership and take care of his woman. And Yahweh said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, who had been deceived by the serpent, by the way. But do you remember what Yahweh said? Just before he got on to Adam about listening to the voice of his wife, turn with me to Genesis chapter 3. Bereshit chapter 3. Bereshit chapter 3. We're going to start reading in verse 16. This is what he said before he got on to Adam about listening to the voice of his wife. To the woman he said, I greatly increase your sorrow and your conception. Bring forth children in pain, and your desire is for your husband, and he does rule over you. Now, why would he say, and your desire is for your husband? Some people believe that this desire thing was something of a sexual nature. But note that the very next thing that Yahweh says is, and he does rule over you. Now, why would he say, and your desire is for your husband, and he does rule over you? The answer is because, you see, her own desire, independent of her husband, is what got her into trouble in the first place. Okay? Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. Everybody there? And what are those next two words? Woman saw. Not they saw, or he saw, but the woman saw. That the tree was good for food. It was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree, what's that next word? Desirable to do what? Make one wise. Okay? That's not got anything to do with anything physical. And she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. You see, it was her doing her own desire that got her into trouble, and she led and Adam followed, and it's that simple. And you know what? Yahweh gave Cain virtually the same instructions. Look in Genesis chapter 4. He gave him the same instructions concerning sin. Genesis 4, verse 6. And Yahweh said to Cain, why are you wroth? And why is your face fallen? If you do well, is there not acceptance? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and it's what? Desire is for you, but you should master it. Interestingly, where it says master it here in the ISR, if you look in Young's literal translation, the modern KJV and others, it says rule. And its desire is for you, but you should rule it. That's the same Hebrew word, mashal, translated as rule, which we just read in Genesis 3:6. It's the same word. So anyway, back to Genesis 3:16. To the woman he said, I greatly increase your sorrow and your conception. Bring forth children in pain. And your desire is for your husband, and he does rule over you. And to the man he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, do not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you are to eat of it all the days of your life, and the ground shall bring forth thorns and thistles for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you are to eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you return. As we've discussed before, the woman was brought to the man just like every other creature was, to see what he would call her, just like he did with all the others. Yahweh created the woman for the man, and Yahweh gave the woman to the man. And it was his responsibility to take care of her. The problem started when she went after her own way, which was contrary to what? Yahweh's Torah. And Adam permitted it and even followed her lead. So in Genesis 1, this is what we have. We have Yahweh deals with creation week. Genesis 2nd chapter, Yahweh plants the Garden of Eden, forms Adam out of the dust and makes him a helper, Hawa. By the way, this word translated helper or helpmeet is the Hebrew word ezer. All right? It is made of the letters ayin, zayin, and resh. Pictographically, ezer or helper means to watch. What do you do with an eye? You look, right? You watch. All right, now the zayin is a weapon. Now, what do you do with a weapon? You protect, right? Every time I say, what do you do with a weapon? People say you attack somebody. But if I ask you, what do you do? They say, you protect yourself. All right? And the resh is the head. All right? Pictographically, what that word helper means is to watch and protect the head. That's what she was created for. That is to a great extent why she was made, to watch and protect the head. To watch and protect the head does not mean follow your own what? Desire. Yeah. Your desire is to be for Him, to protect Him. So Genesis 1 again deals with creation week. Genesis 2 plants the Garden of Eden, forms Adam and Hawa out of the dust and makes him a helper, Hawa. In Genesis 3, Adam and Hawa sin and receive their punishment and are thrown out of the garden. All right? And when you look at it like that, it really didn't take very long for man to blow it, does it? Did it? No, it didn't take long at all. And I don't know if you know it or not, But the way in which Hashatan undermined mankind was by upsetting the order of operation in the family of Adam. He deceived Hawa into taking the lead, and Adam followed. Why else do you suppose that the very first Torah ever given to any human being after the fall was that to the woman he said, I greatly increase your sorrow and conception, bring forth children in pain, and your desire is for your husband, and he does rule over you. Do you realize that this is the very first Torah ever given to a human being after the fall? The reason I say to human beings is because something got said to the serpent. And it was given so as to command those two to get things back in the order of Yahweh. Do you know who hates this command more than anyone? Hasatan and Jezebel. That's who. I'm not going to go into a detailed message on the history of the feminist movement, but I am going to comment on the damage that the rise, the rage, and the rampage of the feminist movement has done and continues to do. And I do want to point out that it is diametrically opposed to the first Torah that Yahweh gave man after the fall. And it is opposed to the family structure of Yahweh. One of the main things that I see going on by the feminists is a war against the boys that I mentioned before. And let me tell you what, when they're little boys, they're a lot more defenseless than they are later on. It's a lot easier for a little boy to be broken. There's been an effort by various feminist groups in this country for quite a while to feminize the boys. You see, they see boys as creatures that need to be more like girls. Boys are too aggressive. They're too competitive. And they need to be more like girls. They believe that the reason that boys are this way is not because boys and girls are mentally different, but rather because our society makes boys that way. In 1992, Time magazine released a cover story that said, I'm glad everybody's sitting down. Why are men and women different? It isn't just upbringing. New studies show they are born that way. Wow. See why I'm glad you're all sitting down? Because I'm sure you were going to be completely shocked. I really didn't think you were going to be completely shocked. But it shocked the pop culture and the social engineers finding things like this are exceedingly upsetting to Jezebel feminists. For many years now, we have been fed a steady diet of how girls are being shortchanged in the educational system. There's a lot of attention focused on girls and their self-esteem. And the feminists have done a lot to promote the idea of female victimization. Do you ever hear from feminist politicians, their accomplices in politics and in the media, talk about the war on women? You hear that, don't you? The war on women. It's propaganda which is repeated so much that the average person doesn't even question it. There's war on women. They warring at your house? No, they are somewhere. It's all on the news. I saw a video recently where a young man and a young woman were looking at their paychecks, and hers was only 77% of his, because women supposedly get paid 23% less than men. So she spends the rest of this video intentionally not completing tasks, not completing reports, time spent in meetings. She just gets up when she's been in there for 77% of the time. Because if women are paid only 77% of what men make, then she needed to only do 77% of her job. The message in this video was that the workplace in the United States is unfair to women. Plain and simple. This was a propaganda video which advances a lie based on skewed statistics. First of all, it is against federal law in the United States of America to pay people less than others based on their gender. Anybody at your place of employment seen in the break room that big plaque from the EEOC, and it says it is against federal law, and it tells you the codes and everything to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, sex, national origin, etc., 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 and gender being one of them? The U.S. Equal Opportunity Commission will come in and slap you with fines and then post it on their internet website if you do that. And if you don't believe me, just go to www.eeoc.gov and it'll be there on the home page. Scrolls by different people that they slapped with fines. That 77% stuff simply comes from taking the salaries of all full-time men and averaging them against the salaries of all full-time women. It does not take into consideration taking time off to have children. Most men don't do that. You know? Yeah. Women entering the workplace later in life after the children are grown, which means starting off at the ground level and having to work your way up rather than having been working your way up all for 20 years. That more men than women are in union jobs, which means their salaries are protected and, are negotiated every year. Doesn't take that into consideration. Or that oftentimes women go into fields. I didn't say dragged into fields or pushed into fields. Women go into fields that traditionally pay less than some occupations that some men tend to go into. There are more women, for instance, that go into things like teaching and social workers. All right? These jobs don't pay as much as engineers and scientists or plumbers. When the reason when the reason for the differences is factored into the discrepancy there, the difference virtually goes away. And you might say, well, there are women who go into engineering and science, and you'd be right. But it is against the law to pay women less than men for doing the same work. It just is. But the facts will not cause the charge that there is a war against women to go away. It won't. Do you know who is really getting shortchanged in our society and in our educational system? It's the boys. It's the boys. There is a book that I would recommend for everybody to read. It's not a religious book, but it speaks volumes about some things that Hasatan is doing in our society and the deleterious effects that it is having on our society. And although the author does not tie this into what happened in the garden, we can see it. The name of the book is called The War Against Boys: How Misguided Feminism is Harming Our Young Men. Oddly enough, it is extremely well documented. The guy's name that wrote this book is Christina Hoff Sommers. That's right. She's not a guy, she's a gal. And therefore not a male chauvinist. As a matter of fact, she fancies herself as a feminist and wrote another book, I think, called Who Hijacked Feminism. Who Stole Feminism, that's the name of it. It accuses the feminists of using unsubstantiated information, like that one I just mentioned, that 77% thing, in portraying women as victims. The War on Boys came out around the year 2000, and she has revised it with newer statistics in an updated version called The War Against Boys: how misguided policies are harming our young men. But I recommend that you get it. I, for one, am glad that a woman came out with this book, or a book like this, because in today's climate, a man would not have been taken seriously if he had presented the exact same data, if you'd have taken the same book and put a guy's name on the front of it. But she exposes much about what is wrong and how the courts are even perpetuating the problem. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. You see, everything these days is a crisis. You ever notice that? When the president gets on TV, there's this crisis, or there's that crisis, or everything's a crisis. I think we've forgotten what a crisis really is. And we are frequently hearing things from places like the Ad Council. You know who the Ad Council is? A lot of the public service announcements that you hear on the radio, it'll say a message from the Ad Council and this station, or something like that. But we're hearing things about them, the Ad Council, the Girl Scouts, and others about how perilous things are for girls in America. Another thing that we are bombarded with is how violent men are and how they have all the advantages. All right, I want to read to you the first paragraph in this book, and it says, "It's a bad time to be a boy in America. The triumphant victory of the U.S. women's soccer team at the World Cup last summer has come to symbolize the spirit of American girls. The shooting at Columbine High last spring might be said to symbolize the spirit of American boys." Wow. When I read this, I was able to concur with what she wrote immediately. See, girls are in a crisis and need help. Boys are brutes, and girls need to be protected from them. See if you are familiar with any of these public service announcements. Okay? You may have heard these. A little girl has the following exchange with her daddy. "Daddy, why is the sky blue?" "Why, it's to match your pretty eyes." "Nope, not even close." See, all the colors have wavelengths and are diffused by oxygen and nitrogen. And since blue is the shortest wavelength, it's diffused up to 10 times more. And Dad says, "Who taught you that?" "Mommy." Then the announcer says, "By the 6th grade, many girls lose interest in math and science, which they may need for future jobs." All right? Daddy's sweetness towards his little girl is met with disrespect and a snotty condescension towards her father by the little girl, and the father is portrayed as somewhat of a romantic imbecile, and Mommy is a mental megalith, passing the baton on to her daughter. How about this one? A little girl asks her mama to sing her lullaby. When the mother and the little girl start to sing a round of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And they both sing together, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, you're a ball of gas that's very far. 32 light years in the sky, 10 parsecs," which is really high. "Helium, carbon, and hydrogen fuse to make our starry friend. When it enters supernova stage, it explodes with bursts of rays. And if the star's mass is big and bold, it will become a black hole." And then the announcer says, "By the 6th grade, many girls lose interest in math and science, which they may need for future jobs. So next time your daughter asks you to sing a lullaby, sing in science." Notice, no dad. Mom's a rocket scientist. Well, at least she's got a good grasp of astronomy. How about that? She's got a good grasp of astronomy. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. That's not what the problem is. Because we need educated women, I mean. Yeah, of course we do. But note the difference between the messages sent about boys in PSAs concerning boys. See if you've heard this one. Has anybody heard any of these other two? Huh? Okay. A grim-sounding announcer says, As a dad, you probably spent years teaching your son how to hit a baseball, how to throw a tight spiral and hit a receiver, how to hit the strike zone. The question is, have you spent much time, or I'm sorry, how much time will you spend teaching your son what not to hit? Teach your son early and often that all violence against women is wrong. For tips on what to say, visit endabuse.org. Brought to you by the Family Violence Prevention Fund, the Wyatt Institute for Violence Prevention, and the Ad Council, and this station. Do you see the difference between the messages that we send about boys and the ones we send about girls? Lift girls up and make them smart. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Lift girls up and make them smart. Encourage them to reach for the stars. Boys are violent towards girls and very much need to be guided away from their naturally violent nature. I want to share this with you from the book. The idea that schools and society grind girls down has given rise to an array of laws and policies intended to curtail the advantage boys have and to redress the harm done to girls. That girls are treated as the second sex in school and consequently suffer. That boys are accorded privileges and consequently benefit. These are the things everyone is presumed to know, but they are not true. A review of the facts shows that boys, not girls, on the weak side of an education gender gap. The typical boy is a year and a half behind the typical girl in reading and writing. He is less committed to school and less likely to go to college. In 1997, and she has amended these since then, in 1997, college full-time enrollments were 45% male and 55% female. The Department of Education predicts that the portion of boys in college classes will continue to shrink, and it has. Data from the U.S. Department of Education and from several recent university studies show that far from being shy and demoralized, today's girls outshine boys. They get better grades, they have higher educational aspirations, they follow more rigorous academic programs and participate in advanced placement classes at higher rates. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, slightly more girls than boys enroll in high-level math and science courses. Girls, allegedly timorous and lacking in confidence, now outnumber boys in the student government, in honor societies, on school newspapers, and in debating clubs. Only in sports are boys ahead, and women's groups are targeting the sports gap with a vengeance. Girls read more books. They outperform boys on tests for artistic and musical ability. More girls than boys study abroad. More join the Peace Corps. At the same time, more boys than girls are suspended from school. More are held back and more drop out. That's not good. Boys are 3 times as likely to receive a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. More boys than girls are involved in crime, alcohol, and drugs. Girls attempt suicide more often than boys, but it is the boys who more often succeed. In 1997, a typical year, 4,483 young people aged 5 to 24 committed suicide. 4,483. 701 females and 3,782 males. The performance gap between boys and girls in high school leads directly to the growing gap between male and female admissions to college. The Department of Education reports that in 1996, there were 8.4 million women, but only 6.7 million men enrolled in college. It predicts that women will hold on to and increase their lead well into the next decade, and by 2007, numbers will be 9.2 million women and 6.9 million men. Right. Much of the reason for this is that the Jezebel feminists have infiltrated the school systems and the departments of education and have been able to lobby for laws that punish school systems that are not putting girls first in order to make up for the wrongs of the past. Boys need more structure, discipline, and stimulating activities than do girls. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Yeah. Folks at home, there's some heads bobbing around here. All right? The Brits were having the same problem. But they started trying to fix it about 10 years ahead of the United States. Do you know that the Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to have an all-girls school where boys are excluded so as to help with female academics? But it is illegal to have an all-male school. Is that equal protection? Anyway, that's something different. Even though the Brits, now the Canadians and the Australians, have discovered that all-male schools bring back boys up to where they're supposed to be, interestingly. But we can't have that here because we've got to make the boys more like girls. How many of you ladies want a husband that's more like a girl or more like a wife? Especially if you get robbed. I know, then they'll get both of your purses. Just saying. Y'all need to stop. The feminists actually say this: boys need to be more like girls. All right? And do you know what will happen? Do you know what will happen when we feminize all the boys and an invading army comes? We'll fight like girls. We'll fight like girls. Yep. Hitting them with their purses. The feminists actually promote that a woman should not even need a man in many cases. You know? And do you know what? With all of our modern conveniences, to a great extent, that's just about right. You don't need to chop wood. You got instant heat, air conditioning. You don't need anybody to go out and hunt for you. Though a lot of them are vegans, a lot of them are, you know, if you've got a grocery store where you can go get all the meat that you need, you don't need to get up and feed the horses or saddle them up or anything, because we just get in the car and ride down the road. Huh? That's what that card's for. You don't even need a man for a mechanic. You got that card. You just got that card. You run it down, and you don't have to. You got other people that'll do that for you. All right. People are trying to keep. I was trying to decide if I want to go down a rabbit trail, but I'm not. Now, I'll just say there's these two women who think they're married that recently, and they went to they went to a place here in Atlanta where you can get biological material to make you pregnant, and they were told that the guy that was the donor, I can't remember what all it said, but it was just a glowing report. Well, it turns out later on they found out he's schizophrenic and he's not anything. And I'm kind of like, yeah, you know, we didn't go down YHWH's path when we did that, did we? We did not go down YHWH's path when we did that. And that's what you get. People are trying to keep boys from being boys and teaching girls and boys that boy behavior is bad, and that the desire of the woman is paramount to the man's. And this is not YHWH's way. But what concerns me more than that is what's going to happen when the system hiccups. Are we going to have men who can roll up their sleeves and do the hard things that a man has to do when there's no electricity, no food, no heat, and bad guys everywhere? Not if Jezebel has her way. Yeah. How many armies of women did Yisrael send out to fight? 0. How many armies of women came up against Yisrael? 0. How many armies of women can you think of through history? How many women did Moshe send to spy out the land? We need tough men. And did you know what? Masculinity is not something that a woman can bestow on a man. Because, see, she does not possess masculinity. Masculinity is something that has to be bestowed on a young fella by another man. It has to be passed down. And that's why we need strong fathers in the home. Amen? We need men to be men, and that means leaders both in the home and in the communities, and especially spiritually. And that's another area where men are faltering. All right. Now let me show you what I'm afraid of, what we're heading for. Turn with me to Isaiah chapter 3. YHWH chapter 3. Page 415 in the old ISR. Well, I've been talking a lot. It's only my second sip of coffee. Isaiah chapter 3. By the way, I don't want anybody to hear that I'm saying that girls shouldn't be taken care of, because y'all have heard some of my sermons on what the men need to be doing to take care of the women. Amen? All right, so y'all know what my stand are. Some of these folks out in YouTube land don't. All right? And I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is that there is a satanic scheme that is being done on a mass scale against a certain very vulnerable segment of our society that needs to be brought up to be strong rather than being broken down. And that's what I'm talking about. Isaiah 3, verse 12. My people, youths exert pressure on them, and women rule over them. O my people, your leaders lead you astray and swallow the way your paths. Can anybody here relate to the youths exert pressure on them? Yeah, it's not a laughing matter. It's not a laughing matter. The former Speaker of the House of Representatives is a woman. You know, the one that said we've got to pass the bill so we can see what's in it. Ms. Pelosi. And she was number 3 from the presidency. And do you think that she's interested in raising up boys the way that Yahweh wants them raised up? But you see, there's a war against girls too. There's a war against girls. Girls are taught that if they are not in a man's world, vying for a man's position and a man's wage, that she's letting her sisters down. Any of y'all ever been on the receiving end of some of that? Heads nodding in here. We even lower physical standards, like those of firefighters, for instance, so that women can do whatever they want. Now I'll ask you this question. If you're stuck in a burning building and need to be carried down a ladder, who do you want to see coming up that ladder? A fireman? Yeah, a fireman. Okay, even the ladies here say a fireman. See, it's interesting. I had to take this class at my company one time called Valuing Differences. Before the class got over with, I told them, I said, no, this is about valuing politically correct differences. It's not about valuing differences. But anyway, they had people in there from all kind of different departments, and they had some women in there who work in the generation plants. And I heard one of them say, I might not be able to get that valve started, but if he'll get it started for me, I can turn it just as fast as he can. And others are going, yeah. All right? And I'm thinking, no, you can't. If you've got the upper body strength, if you don't have the upper body strength to get that valve started, then he's got more strength to turn it faster than you do anyway. All right? And that's just a bunch of silliness. All right? They're getting paid the same thing that the guy is that has to come over there and start the valve for them. Okay? They're getting paid the same because it's against the law to pay them differently, see. But there is a war against women. They're told that they can be a mother and a career woman who they say can work in the home. I'm sorry. Women who say that they work in the home. Women that say that they work in the home and raise the children are frequently snubbed, as if they're not as good or something. Have any of you ladies ever seen that? Motherhood is the greatest and most important job that there is, and because you've heard the saying, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And there's a lot to that. I'd started writing this song called "You Can't Be a Mommy and a CEO." Now before I want to preface that on this. I know that there's a lot of ladies out there who are in a situation where they've got to work. All right? And if they'd rather not be doing what they're doing, they'd rather be at home with those children. But their economic condition is for whatever reason not able to. I'm talking about these that want to have it all. Because I'll bet you this. I'll bet you the lady that's working on the line at the carpet mill down here and paying nearly her entire wages for daycare doesn't feel like she's getting it all. Amen. You can't be a mommy and a CEO. While you're tending to one, you'll let the other one go. You got one for the money and two for the show. Oh, that's strong there. You got one for the money and two for the show. You can't be a mommy and a CEO. Girls are under attack too. It's just a different attack. But it's still being done to destroy the family design, the way Yahweh designed it to be. It still is. Girls are given a message also that girls get a lot of mixed messages. Girls get a lot of mixed messages. One of the messages that they get given is that they're supposed to be sexy and that chastity is a burden that was placed on them by an oppressive, misogynist society. Misogynist is a word that means woman-hating. They're encouraged, if you'll listen to some of the music and things, to be hoes and promiscuous. And once they fall for it, they realize that they have lost something that they can never get back. Something special. But it's too late then. Their music glamorizes premarital and extramarital sex. The TV shows glamorize and makes jokes about premarital and extramarital sex. Even the magazines staring them in the face at the grocery store when they check out is glamorizing premarital and extramarital sex and sending that message that if you're not doing it, then you're not normal, you're missing out, and there's something wrong with you. And once they fall for it, many of them go into depression and even commit suicide or attempt it. When reality sets in, they realize they can't undo what's been undone. Yes, girls are under attack too. But let's keep reading in Isaiah. Verse 12, we'll start there again. My people, youths exert pressure on them, and women rule over them. O my people, your leaders lead you astray and swallow the ways of your path. Yahweh shall stand up to plead and is standing to judge the peoples. Yahweh enters into judgment with the elders of His people and its heads. It is you who have eaten up the vineyard, the plunder of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the faces of the poor, declares the Master Yahweh of hosts. And Yahweh says, because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks and seductive eyes. Does this sound like something new? Walking and mincing as they go, making a jingling with their feet. Therefore Yahweh shall smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and Yahweh expose their nakedness. And that day Yahweh takes away the finery of the anklets, and the headbands, and the crescents, the pendants, and the bracelets, and the veils, the headdresses, and the leg ornaments, and the sashes, and the perfume bottles, and the amulets, the rings, and the nose jewels, the costly robes, and the cloaks, and the shawls, and the purses, the mirrors, and the fine linen, and the turbans, and the large veils. And it shall be instead of sweet fragrance, a smell of decay, and instead of a belt, a rope, And instead of well-set hair, baldness. And instead of a festal robe, a girding of sackcloth. And branding instead of loveliness. Your men shall fall by the sword, and your strength in battle. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she, deserted, shall sit on the ground. This is where this all is potentially leading if we don't take up the roles that Yahweh has prescribed for us. Speaking of taking up the proper roles, I have a theory about something concerning the war on boys. In the classroom, boys and girls alike are taught that boys have unfair advantages over girls, that boys are violent and unruly. Boys are the future wife beaters, rapists, sexual harassers, sexual predators, child molesters, deadbeat dads who are unreliable, abandon families, and don't pay child support. Boys are given the message that they're pretty crummy individuals. And interviews with boys show that many of them feel terrible about being all of the things I just mentioned, and are afraid that they will do awful things to women someday. That's a terrible thing to put in a kid's head. Do you know who else gets that same message? The little girls. The little girls in the classroom with them. Have you noticed the increased number of lesbians that you see and hear about? Bunch of heads nodding in here. Is it possible that girls are being taught that boys are such a high risk that many of them see lesbianism as a viable option? They see it as a safer way to have a relationship than to involve a man who they have been told are violent, unemotional jerks. Is that from Yahweh or Hashatan? We are under attack, folks. We're under attack. And these are not Yahweh's ways. Our last passage today is 1 Peter. Chapter 5. You folks at home don't know this. At the end of the messages, I'll say, questions, comments, complaints, or concerns. I bet I'll get some today. 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Be sober. Watch, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. We've talked about this before. Do you know who a lion will try to devour first? The weak and the young. Do you know who said, he alone who owns the youth gains the future? Do you know who said that? It is the same guy who said, give me the youth and Germany will rule the world. See, he understood the importance of getting to the children. Can we change the world? Probably not, but we can change the way that we teach our own children by the life we live. The children are our future. But their future is going to have to come from a family structured after Yahweh's design. There is a war against the boys and the rest of the family. We would do well to abstain from the sins committed in the garden and run our families the way that Yahweh intended. Amen? Praise and raise your boys to be men. And men and fathers, and praise and raise your girls to be women and mothers. And above all, teach them to be faithful servants to Yahweh. Yevarekeka Yahweh Vaishmareka Ya Er Yahweh Panavaleka Bikuneka Yasa Yahweh Panavaleka Biasem Laka Shalom. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make His face to shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahweh lift up His face upon you and give you His complete contentment.